So I added just Bootstrap back in. Cool. So now we just have a little nice formatting. In a nutshell, what I did is I added in nav menu, and then on the new page, I just added in some classes, form group, form control, button primary, and then the standard Bootstrap steps. So updating the gem file, and adding the helpers to the application.js, that sort of stuff. Great. So now we have our form 4. But if we submit this, what will happen, right? It'll hit the new the create users path, right? If we go to our users controller, all right, we have defined the create users path here, but there's no associated view with it. So Rails will throw an error, right, saying cannot find a view associated with it. So let's handle the action, right? So we want to say, all right, let's create a new user, and oops. And we're going to want to do the same thing as before, right? User param. So we're going to define our private method, right? And we'll say params dot require, and we'll say user. And we want to permit certain attributes, right? This is for security reasons. We don't want someone to pass up information that we aren't necessarily looking for. So I'm going to say the name, email, and the password. We're not saying the password digest here, right? And why is that? Because, right, in the form, right, we're using password. And that's because the hash secure password, remember, defines that setter function. It defined password equals. We can pass up the password, and it'll convert that to the digest for us. So we say password here, right? And similarly, we want to say we're expecting a password. We'll permit that through. Great. So here we have our user.new, right? We're going to go ahead and want to save it. Right? Save our user. If we save it, great. Now we're logged in. So now we've created a new user. So we'll say a success. And maybe we'll even say, what's the user's name? Right? And if not, maybe we'll just go back to the same page and we'll render it new again. And this could be for, because they didn't pass up the right information or they missed a field or something. Right? We'll create this information. Great. So now if we are to log in, right? Right? It didn't flash anything and it didn't redirect us because we didn't really handle it. Right? Do we see any errors? No errors. Right? It's just the server logs tell us that there's no content to render. But it looks like here, if we inspect the server logs, right, it actually inserted in the database the information, right? Name, email, and the password digest. So that means that we successfully created the user, but we really don't have like a login page or anything like that. So I guess for now, we'll just say, let's just redirect, right, to the root path. And we can handle that. So maybe, on the root path, which goes to our index, right, we have the sign up page. Now we also need to start adding in a sign in. So like a returning user, right, how they want to sign in. And now we don't want the new user path, but we actually want to create what's called a session. I'm going to say new session path. And now that we also added Bootstrap, I'll go ahead and say, let's make these some nice buttons. Great. So we'll go back, basic page. See if we can load that. And it throws an error. It says nothing matches new session path. Right? Which we expected because we haven't yet defined any sort of session or session path. So let's go to our routes. And again, we could do, we could just say get sessions, right? Or get session, and we can map that to something, but we'll just let Rails do most of the heavy lifting for us. So we're going to say resources sessions, but we only want a few things, and we can always modify this if we need to add some stuff later. This isn't like set in stone, so we just want a new and create. Great. So in our sign in button, which was on the home page, right, we say new session path. And we're going to use what's called session storage. So when the user logs in, we're going to go ahead and give them a cookie that is a session storage. And then when they access another page, we have access to that same cookie. And so then we know who the user is. So we need a form for users to sign in, right? So we have defined this new session path. We don't have anything yet that's going to handle it. And we have nothing yet that's going to show us a kind of sign-in page. So we'll go ahead and create those. Generate a sessions controller. And we're also going to want a sign-in page. So we're going to go to app, views. Oops, I should have just said sessions. Thanks. Well, now we have a sessions controller, which we don't need, because we actually want just sessions. Okay, well now we have just empty stuff, but cool. So we want sessions, and we also want a view in sessions. So we're going to say, let's create new, and here's a page, and we want a sign-in page. So similarly, we could do here, H1, right? Sign in. We could also do a form for, but let's try a different one. Let's just try this time a form tag. A form tag gives you fewer of the kind of automatic things, but it gives you more control. So we're going to say we want to go to the sessions path. And we could also say method post, but that's also implied, so we actually don't have to do that. And here we go. Right, and what we want to do is really say, all right, let's let the user sign in. So we're going to say text field tag, right, and we're going to call this one email. And we don't want to give it any sort of value initially. And then we're going to say class form control, do this formatting, and we're going to copy that, except here we're going to change this to password, right? And again, we don't really want to display the password for the user out of sensitivity, so we're going to say password field tag, and then we're going to say, all right, let's go ahead and do a submit tag, and this will say sign in.
I think the command line freeze.
Ah, thank you. And we're going to make this the button. All right, so we have our view here. Let's check out our sessions controller, right? We have no actions yet. And so the routes, we defined 2 actions. So we're going to go ahead and, just say new. We don't need to say, add sessions here because we're not using it yet, right? Our view doesn't expect any sessions object yet. If you use form for, it does. In this case, we're using a form tag, and it doesn't expect anything like that. So we'll go ahead and refresh, and now we want to say sign in. Great, right? But it's there's not quite a lot of text here. Maybe we'll just add some things real quickly. So we'll add a placeholder, and we'll say enter your email. Similarly, so people just know what fields they're filling out. Password. The nil here means don't give it a default value, and that's totally fine, right? We have an email and a password. But let's say we wanted to maybe refer our friends, and we want to make it even easier for them. We could say if there's a parameter in the email, go ahead and put it here. Right? Still same as before, but up here, if I start to put in an email. So for example, if I put in add a param email equals something, when I refresh, it'll just show up here, right? Just a nicety. Here's a link to sign up. Oh, look at that. My email is already in here. It kind of just reflects nicely. The email I used, I believe, to log in was this. And we'll sign in. And it says, action create cannot be found, right? Great. So we know the login worked, but now we need to actually go ahead and do the next thing, which is define our create function. When we're kind of doing this by finding the errors and fix them as we go along until we have a working app, right? So we're going to want to create a session, right? What we're trying to do here is let the user log in and show that they're actually in the app. And so we're going to need to want to define the user and create this session. So we say, all right, let's go ahead and search for the user. And so we can do aware, something like that, and look for the email that comes up, right? If we find a match, we can do something. So we say, great, we found a user. If we cannot go ahead and authenticate them and log them in, we'll do so. So we'll supply the password. And if you want here, rather than saying params email, right, you could, if you wanted to, example, like keep things simple, you could say, like email param, right, equals params email, right? Maybe verify to string, maybe trim off the ending, maybe lowercase it, if you want to have consistency, right? But it's usually easier to handle that stuff in the model, like we said. So maybe the model has like a before filter. So before you save it, we'll lowercase the email, right? Just things if you want to keep data consistent, definitely things to consider. So if we actually can go ahead and authenticate, we'll go ahead and flash something, and we'll say welcome, signed in. And for now, we don't have anywhere to go, so we'll redirect back to the root path. Maybe we can show them something on the root path so that they know they're signed in. Otherwise, right, what do we want to do? Well, we want to kind of deny the user, right? They had a bad password. And what about here? What goes here? Well, here we couldn't even find the user, so we also want to deny them. So maybe we'll define a function, right, that denies the user. If I can type. All right, there we go. Right, to find the user, maybe we say something like combination of username and password did not match. Nowadays, though, it seems like we can tell the user more specifically whether or not it was a bad password. It used to be that for security reasons they wouldn't want to tell you if it was a bad username or a bad password. But I think nowadays that's not as much a concern. So we could say something like flash error, password, or like wrong password. Right. Good question. So flash is a helper to show like flash messages at the top. Kind of alert dialogues, kind of like a little pop-up, but not quite a pop-up on the top with the message. But your good point that right now we're not actually displaying the flash. So after we do this, just go ahead and add some code in to display the flash, and we can see what that looks like. So wrong password, and we'll maybe render new, right? And so say, all right, wrong password, go ahead and render the same thing. And actually, since we're actually redirecting to a new page, we're going to actually want to say flash.now. And maybe here we'll say error, right? We'll say, oh, this is user not found. If we want, we could redirect them to the new user path, right? We could say, oh, user not found, why don't you go ahead and sign up? Maybe they actually just inputted it in the wrong, they typed it in incorrectly, and they actually have an account. So we also could say, render new. We also could do is give them a nice little like notice. So we could even say redirect to, and we'll say action new. Oops. New. And we'll pass in a parameter. We'll say maybe let's show a hint, right? And this is true. And what will this do is it will just add this as a parameter to the page, right? So after the URL, add a question mark and the parameter, right? This is anything we could say, so user sign in page or something. It's just whatever we want to find the parameter to be. And then maybe we can go ahead and actually help them out. So we'll say show hint is true here. So when we go to the to the sign in page, right, which is our sessions new, we can maybe say here, if params, and what was the name of the param? We said show hint, right? If params show hint, then maybe we can say something like, I don't know, link to new user path, right? And we can say create new account, right? Just a nice helper. If the param show hint is there, maybe at the top of the page say create a new account. And the last thing we need to do is show the flash, right? That we can set it setting throughout the app. And it seems like we want to use it on a lot of different pages. So that suggests we should put it in the application.html. Last time we put the nav bar into its own partial, which is just nice to keep this kind of page kind of clean. Just for the sake of time, I'll leave it in here. But let's kind of make this a little nicer. So we'll say clicking on the top button, right? Simple chat takes us to the root path. That's great. And we said, based off the new Bootstrap, we're going to make that nav bar expand and not nav bar toggleable. Some of these things we can get to later. Here we have our yield, which is great. Let's go ahead and add in the flash messages, right? And as of that does nothing. So we'll define a helper which defines how to show the flash messages. And actually, I'm going to take the code from the lab, a sneak preview of the lab this week. It's a coder dating. But here we have flash messages, and we're just going to copy this code. Basically just for displaying the flash message. So we'll put this in our application helper. Great. And it defines just two functions for us. Basically, it's looking for success, error, or notice. It translates those into Bootstrap CSS classes, and then basically, makes them into a div. Right here, it adds in the actual message class that responds to the appropriate type. So if we say flash success, it'll append alert success in the div. It'll do a fade, which is just kind of a nice little helper, and throw it in, right? So we've defined flash messages here, and in our application.html, we've also defined it here. So hopefully it'll show up. Great, so we have our sessions controller. We have our login. Last thing is we redirect to the root path, and if we do that right now, nothing's gonna happen. It'll look like it'll flash that they've logged in, but it won't actually appear to be different. So let's go ahead and make it a little different. And we're gonna let's just see what this looks like, and we can then go from there. So we'll go here. It says welcome, and that's because the previous time I'd signed in, but it didn't redirect us. But it recognizes that we're here, and if we want to sign up, we could sign up. Let's try to sign in, right? So we said Ruby, and we tried our password, and undefined method authenticate for user active record relation. Spell that quickly. I think we want a find by, so we want just one. Let's try this again. Great. Here's our flash message. It took us back to the root path, but it didn't actually do anything other than that message. We don't really quite know what happened. The other thing is it signed us in and redirected to us, but if we redirect, another page doesn't yet know that we've logged in, right? So the last thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and set the session. And Rails gives us a handy helper to do so. We can set the session ID, or we can say, for example, user ID, and we're going to say @user.id, right? What that'll do is it'll create for us a cookie that's then included on all subsequent requests. So if we navigate to a new page or we send in a new request, we can go ahead and look for this user ID in the session, and it'll be included in that request. Now, you may have questioned about the security of passing down the actual user ID, but Rails has some components to think about that. So one thing it'll do is there's a file called config/secrets. And this is basically a key that it uses, and it's auto-generated. What it'll do is it'll sign the session, and so it'll encrypt the session and also give it a signature using that key. And if anyone were to tamper with it or change the session, right, then the session signature would be different than the one that's included back. And so Rails has built-in security to prevent people from changing that on the front end side. So we can set this here, and that means the user is now signed in. But we're also probably going to want to access this user throughout the app. We want to find out who the user is and show them the right messages. So let's go ahead and define that in our application helper. Not application helper, sorry, our application controller, right? This is kind of our parent class. If you notice, all the other controllers inherit from the application controller. That's the parent controller. So we can define a method here, right? Let's just say, give me the current user. This is something that we will probably want throughout most of the application. And so we can just say current user equals user.find. And we know the user ID. So we can just say pass it in the user ID that comes back from the cookie, right? But let's say in a single request, we say give me current user.name and current user.email. That'll call this function twice, which would then produce two database queries, right? Each time this function is called, it searches in the database for the user given this user ID, right? So maybe we can optimize that a little bit, and we can say, current user, right? If at current user.present or something, right? We can make this right current user, right? Something like that. We can say return it if it's already present. Otherwise, go ahead and set it. A helper method is kind of just Rails shorthand. It's like an or equals. It's basically saying if it already exists, the or, go ahead and return it. If it doesn't, run this query, set that to the current user, and then return it as well. And that's just memorization. It prevents us from making multiple database calls if within the context of a single web request, right? So this is not across multiple web requests. It's just in a single request. If we call this multiple times, we'll prevent multiple database queries. As is though, this function, if isn't accessible yet, so we actually define helper method, and we're going to say current user, and that'll let us access this in our views, for example. So we can then look for the current user in our views. The last thing to do is on the home page, right? We had just the root path and a link to a sign up page. So now we can start to even say, if current user present, right? We can start to say, oh, do something. Else, maybe we'll be smart and we'll show them links to sign up, right? So current user.present, maybe we can say, just very basically, welcome, current user.name to simple chat, right? Just very basic. So now let's see what that looks like. So we're gonna log in, and it says couldn't find user with ID equals. Current user, user.find. Yeah, so we probably want to do something like that so that find throws an error if it doesn't exist. I think find by doesn't. So let's try again. Great, right? So let's go ahead and sign in. And we'll sign in. Great. So now we redirect back to the home page, and we're signed in. And our subsequent request will include this session, which is the user ID. And if we want, we can even be smart, and up here we can customize these, the navbar links. So in our application, right, we can start to say, all right, some of these things we can say, all right, if current user.present, And maybe we'll say like sign out. And that'll go to the destroy session path, right? Because we want to destroy the session. We want to say, all right, user signing out. Let's go ahead and delete the session that we've stored in the cookie. And I think we want to say it's nav link. So similar here. And this one is, oh, so that's all we want to do for if the user is present. Otherwise, they're not logged in. Right, and we can say, let's go ahead and give them options to sign up and sign in. Right, and what is the sign up path? Let's to create a new user, right? The new user path. And what is the sign in path? That was to create a session. That's the new session path. We have yet to define this destroy session path, so let's go ahead and do that. And in the routes here, we have to add it. We can do it like that. But maybe we want to just do something a little bit different. Maybe we want to say, let's go ahead and log out, right? And we say it could be a get, or we could do a destroy. If we do it this way, adding in a destroy here, right? What does that mean? It means the route looks like this, but it also needs an ID, right? You pass up the ID and it deletes that object. We're not really creating a sessions in the database, right? There's no ID concept for a session because it's not a model, it's just a concept. So we'll just say destroy, log out. We won't actually give it any action, any parameters, any ID, but we'll map that to session destroy. Actually, I'll do single quotes here, right? So we'll say, all right, log out, we'll map that to session destroy, and since that's now the name of our path, the log out, we're going to go ahead and want to change this to the log out path. And let's see what our error is. Undefined method for destroy. Delete. Delete. Thank you. Syntax error. And I have an equal sign in the else. The last thing actually is we didn't even define our action here. So it'll route us to something that it doesn't do. This is a simple, right? We want to destroy the session. We want to log out. All we got to do is say session user ID equals no. We cleared out. So now, great. So we're signed in. We see sign out. Fantastic. We'll sign out, and it says no route matches get. So it's looking for sending a get request to log out. We have to modify that to destroy. So method delete, I believe. Session controller. Sessions. Real-time debugging. Great. So it signed us out, but it didn't redirect us. So we can probably add that in to the action. So we'll go back to the sessions controller. Great. We'll redirect to root path. Pretty simple, right? So now we're logged out again. Great. And we can sign in. We see up here, sign in, sign up. Great. We'll sign back in. Right. We say Ruby, fantastic, and our password. Great, and we're signed in. So we've kind of just created a simple sign up flow, sign in flow. We use the session ID, right, to keep the session to keep track of who the user is. We have access to that user. We can go ahead and log out, and when we log out, we right, we said when we logged out, we redirect to the root path, and actually maybe we can even add in a flash message here. We actually do just a one-line success, and we can say logged out, just to give the user some further confirmation that they're logged out. Fantastic. So that's in a nutshell the basic user authentication. Are there any questions? Just like a non-login user? I changed to what? The session is saved in the user's browser. If you change the browser, you will be logged out. So if you're logged in on one browser and you switch to a new browser, it'll treat you as being logged out, and you have to then log back in because the cookie is saved in the browser. Good question. You could, right? You could, if you wanted to create multiple accounts, you could have them open at the same time, one in each browser. Yeah, if you want to test a simple chat, you could chat back and forth with yourself. That's also an option. Yeah. In one place only. So I guess you could look to see if the session ID. I guess you have to store that somewhere. You could store that in like the database, or like a cache. You could have on the example on the user field like logged in, and then if they're logged in, when someone else tries to log in using the same thing, you could then say, oh, you can't log in. Someone else is logged in already with this account. You could also you're talking about logging in on two separate devices or two browsers, right, to the same account, right? You could let them do that, right? If I log in with the same account as you, it won't delete your cookie. You still have access to it, but now I also have access to the account. So you could store that in the database, and if they're logged in, say no one else can log in at the same time. Yeah. So this here, right? You can define this to be whatever you want. So you cannot change the session. Yeah. So this is part of the Rails magic that the client knows to pass it back up. But this here is just a key that we defined, right? So this, if you want it to be, could be coder school, right? And then as long as you then use the same thing every time you use it, it's just a key with a value, and we just named it this way because then it implies what it is to us. Okay, so let's look at the assignment. Now that we have the basic user login, we're going to basically, the goal is to be able to send messages to people and let them read it once and then not read it again. So what does that suggest? Well, that suggests we need a model with messages. What does messages really need? Well, it probably needs a subject, right? And we want it to have a body. Remember, we can say string, but that comes automatically, so there's no need for redundancy. The body though can be more than just the standard length for a string. So we'll give it a text. We're gonna want to know who it came from. So sender ID, and we'll make that an integer. We'll also it could be references, but if it's a user, right, we'd say references. But we actually, because we want two users, message comes from one person to another, right? So it has two relations. So we're going to do this one a little more manual. So we're going to say sender ID is an integer, and we'll just say recipient ID is also an integer, right? So we're not using the Rails magic. We're kind of defining these foreign keys on our own. So we'll go ahead and create that model. We'll also, oh, great. So I should have done message create model message. It's telling me that it recognized it as a plural and it used the singular. Oh, that's great. So we have message. That's my mistake for using the singular. That seems to be my biggest mistake I make. Create messages. Right, so here we see great subject body, sender ID, recipient ID, and our message model is blank for now. So let's go ahead and run our migration. And I've also been forgetting to commit often, but just another reminder to use git commit often. We'll just add in some stuff quickly. Okay, great. So we have our message, right? And we defined a bunch of fields on it. Subject, body, sender ID, and recipient ID. So we're going to want a way to reference those. So let's say you have a message, right? We want to define the sender on the message, right? We have the sender ID as a field on the message. So we could probably say something like, at user. So again, we're going to memorize it. So if we call it multiple times in the same request, we won't have to fetch from the database multiple times. And we'll say find by ID, right? So now we have our sender. So if we have a message, we can then find its sender pretty easily. And this is a nice kind of helper method to do so. Let's go ahead and generate a triple controller. So generate a controller for messages. Oops. And let's just define an index, right? So maybe when you log in, rather than route you to the home page, maybe we'll start routing you to the messages controller page and show you just all your messages, maybe all your unread messages. We kind of do stuff with that. But for now, we'll just say, let's show the user the messages. And we define that current user, right? So we have access to it here. So we say, give me the current user. And maybe we'll say, give me just the received messages. We don't really care for now about the messages they've sent. We want just the received messages. So we'll have to define that in the user model, right? We're asking for the current user.received messages. So let's go ahead and define that. And if we want to, we could use a Rails helper. We could say as may receive messages, but it doesn't yet know how to relate that. So we have to specify the class, which is message. And then we have to say what the foreign key is, which I believe is recipient ID, right? Messages that they've received. You can do it that way. Personally, I prefer just kind of write it out myself because I think it's a little easier than having to do it with the Rails way. But again, it's personal preference. So we can just say receive messages is message dot where recipient ID is user dot is just ID, right? So we say self.id, which is just ID. So we're saying give us the messages where recipient ID, and if we wanted to, we could say order, by like created at, right? Or maybe we want to say order by, sender ID or something. We have some options, but we'll keep it as default. Message where recipient ID is this user, right? This is received messages. Great. We can even say maybe, let's define unread messages. right? Which is what? Which would be received messages, where, and then maybe if we added a field like is read, or like read at, or nil or something, right? So we can define a field read at, give it the timestamp of when it was read, and we can say give us all the fields where it has yet to be read or something, right? And these we define on the user, so we can ask them for the user's received messages. Great. So we ask for users received messages. We also use something similar with sent messages, right? So maybe a list of all the messages the user has sent. Similar thing, where sender ID, right, is us, is this user. And last thing we want to do is we want to display these messages. So we're going to create a view for that. That's the app views messages, and it's our index route. And let's go ahead and maybe say messages, and we'll create a table. Any luck, I can remember how the syntax goes for a table. And I'm going to want a T head. And maybe we'll just display a few things. So we'll say, sender and subject. Do some formatting. Great, and that's our T head. And then when if I get to our T body. And here we want to show all the messages, right? So we need to have some sort of loop where we say, let's look at the messages. And each one will print out what it looks like. And we'll say it's a row in the table. And we'll say, let's make it so we print out the message dot sender, who it's from, right? And we say dot name here. We also, if we wanted to, could define in the user, we could define a toString method. So if we just were to print out just the user, we could say we want to define the toString, and maybe we say, that the toString is just the name, right? Maybe it's actually just the email of the person. Maybe it's some concatenation, so maybe it's, name, email. We can kind of define if we wanted to how it looks. It's really up to you. Or we can define it in the view. Right, there are options for both. We'll define it in the view since we already have it here. And that's the end of that item. And we'll create one more. And we'll say message.subject. Right, and this right here, message.sender.name, is using our sender function, right, which we defined here. So it'll find the sender and actually go ahead and display its name for us. Great. So last thing is we have this index route, right? We have our index action defined here. We have the view defined here. With any luck, the view actually looks like it's going to help us out and show some interesting things. We lastly have to define that route. So for now, we'll just do it quickly. Resources, messages. Right, so we get our basic actions. And maybe when we log in, rather than go to the redirect to the home page, we'll go to this page. So on the home index, right, we say sign in, and that's the new session. So maybe when we log in, we'll go to the, rather than redirect to the root path, we'll redirect to the message path. And let's see if we can get this to work. Great. So here's our messages. We added in that redirect, so next time if we were to log out and log back in, we should be taken to this page. see our messages. And let's go ahead and create a few messages with the time that we have. So we'll set, message dot new. Let's see. So it doesn't have a sender ID or recipient ID. Let's go ahead and set that. So if we recall, our user was 1. User dot our user is user ID 2. So we have our user, we have our message. We'll say let's set the message dot recipient ID to be that user. For now, we'll also just set the sender ID because we lack another user to ourselves. We'll give it a subject in the absence of a UI to kind of create this up for us. And we'll also just give it a body. This is a message. Great. Save it. And let's see it show up. So there it is. So now we start to have our first message show up. Right? We have no way of kind of looking at the message or clicking on it or getting more information. We kind of created just a simple view to show us our messages on this kind of page, and we can start to go from there. Okay, so that was a lot to cover today. Are there any questions?
May I decide unwitness photos or witness
Yeah, on the message model, you could define a has been read, or a read at timestamp, to keep track of that, like the message being read. So you want to find it on the message. So the user will have a lot of messages being sent to them, right? So if you wanted to find keeping track of messages on the user, that gets more complex, right? Because let's say you have 100 messages and you've read 80 messages, right? You would then have to have like an array on the user, right? So if our user model would basically have some field, right, would look like an array, read messages, but that would start to get long. That would start to be an array, right, of IDs, right? They've read message 3, right, message 15, message 16, right, and that could get really, really long. It also doesn't give us very good database querying because we have to then get that out of the database from the user and then send it back to the database for the messages. So what we'd probably want to do is something like this, Rails migration, right? Add, read is read. Or we can even do it to messages, right? We'll open it up and we'll say add column to the messages table, right? Like maybe we say is read. And maybe that'll be a Boolean, like a yes or no. And maybe we'll add a column, read at, and that's a timestamp. Something. Right, something like that. And then if we wanted to, right, so we would define that on the message in the message database table, but then we probably want access to it, right, also on the user. So we would say, something like unread messages, and that's received messages where, read at is nil. Or since we also have is read, we could say is false, right? And then we could just say, give me the users dot unread messages, and that would call this function. Any other questions? That's a great question. So on the sign up page, which is the session's new, here, right, this is sign in. Sign up is new user. So, right, so here we have just a password. If we want, we can also supply a password confirmation. Oops. Right? That's the password confirmation. It's also restricted on the UI, so no one can see it. And that's actually all we have to do. Why? Because we pass in the user model, and the hash secure password defines a setter function for this, right? If we set this, then it compares the two, and if they're the same, goes ahead and saves it. If they're not the same, it'll throw an error. So this, right, means that we'll get it from the user and pass it up as well to the controller. Now, there's also a few things we probably want to do in addition to this. We probably want to make sure it's not blank, because the hash secure password doesn't know whether to check for that, right? If it's blank, it assumes you did not supply it. That's all right. We'll just continue with the password. But maybe we want to say, we actually want them to supply a password confirmation. We actually, don't want them to skip that step. So in the controller, we could look for it, right? So this is the new users. So we could go to the user controller, and right here, we're creating a new user, right? So we can say, if params, and this is the password confirmation, like nil or something, right? We can say, did not supply confirmation. And maybe we can say, render new and return. And just do an early return, right? And that way it forces them to supply password confirmation. We also then maybe could, right? This is asking us to save it. If they type in the password confirmation incorrectly, right, this would then fail, because this line would actually go to compare the password to the password confirmation and save it in the database. And so maybe here we would want to say something like, there's an error, password did not match, or something. Now, of course, you also have logic on the JavaScript side, on the UI side, right? So if you type it in, it immediately could just say, oh, passwords didn't match. You can't click the commit button or the create button. Or we can do it this way. But the hash secure password is smart enough to know that if we supply it, it'll make sure that the password and the confirmation are the same before moving on. Yeah. So you're saying like if they go to another page, like a link, and have them redirect? Yeah. That's actually a little more. You probably want to find that in like your application controller, right? This parent class. So you could do what's called a before filter, or like a before action, right? So something like, I believe it's before action, like authenticate user or something, right? And then you would define that down here. And what you want to be essentially doing is, if session, maybe it has key, right, user ID. Maybe we say, great, do nothing or something, right? Otherwise, redirect to, right, new session page, tab, right? And then because this is in the parent controller, this will get run before, no matter where they try to go, any route, it'll check this first. So you can do something like that. You could add an except here. So I believe you can define it that way. So I think you can do something like except new or I forget the exact syntax, but something like that. So you can choose to on certain actions not to go that way. Say it again.
For the session, how we set this timeout for the session.
Ah, I believe that actually I don't know. I think it's either in the config or you can set it directly here. I actually don't know. I'll find out before you get back to you. The default there's a default session timeout, and I think you can override that in the config file to set it. But I'll double check for you. You had a question back there? Yeah, I think so. These are good questions.
You can also go to the controller. So you don't go to the home index controller, right? Or the home controller. You go to the home controller, you put the skip before action, home name.
So let's say like for some reason we want to go to like right. And then only something like that, I believe.
So whatever controller you want to skip the action, the before action, name the action, whatever it is you want to skip, and then put action.
Thanks, Lloyd.